You never think it'll happen to you. That morning, everything seemed perfectly ordinary. Emma was making breakfast, balancing the baby on her hip while stirring a pot of oatmeal. Little Lily, her 1-year-old daughter, babbled happily, reaching out with chubby fingers toward the spoon. Emma looked at the clock. It was almost 8 a.m., and Alex, her husband, would be heading out to work soon. But she noticed he seemed off, distracted, and a bit distant. Alex had always been the spontaneous type. It was what had drawn her to him in the first place. He was the kind of guy who'd whisk her away for a weekend trip without warning, or surprise her with flowers after a tough day. But that morning, he barely looked her in the eye. He said he had to talk to her, and they sat down at the old, worn-out kitchen table. "I think I need some space," he said. His voice was flat, as though he were discussing the weather. Emma's heart skipped a beat. Was he joking? But one look at his face, and she knew he wasn't. Panic set in. He was leaving her. No, them. Lily was right there, unaware of the sudden shift in her world. Emma pleaded with him, asking if they could work through whatever was troubling him. But Alex just kept shaking his head, as if this decision had been building for months. Within an hour, he was gone. He left behind a few crumpled clothes in the closet, a toothbrush in the bathroom, and Emma, stunned, confused, and utterly heartbroken, holding their daughter in the doorway of their rented apartment. She watched him drive away, disappearing into the morning traffic, leaving her alone with a mountain of rent to pay and a little girl to raise. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. Emma struggled to adjust to her new reality. She went back to her old job at a local cafe, working long shifts, while a neighbor watched Lily. Money was tight, more than tight. Sometimes it felt like she was drowning under the weight of bills and unpaid rent notices slipping under the door. But she refused to break for Lily's sake. She found strength she never knew she had. Lily's second birthday came and went without a word from Alex. It hurt, more than Emma cared to admit, but she told herself that they were better off without him. After all, who would abandon their own child like that? Still, late at night, when the apartment was quiet, Emma couldn't help but wonder what had happened to the man she once thought she'd spend her life with. She'd hear the sound of a car pulling up, and hope would flare up before quickly fading. It was never him. 3 long years went by, filled with late nights, spilled sippy cups, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. Lily grew from a baby into a bright, cheerful toddler who had no memory of her father. She filled the empty spaces in their lives with her infectious giggles and endless curiosity. Emma learned to find joy in the small things, a sunny afternoon in the park, the way Lily's face lit up over a new storybook, or the peace that came with a quiet cup of tea after a long day. Then, one rainy afternoon, as Emma was returning home from the grocery store, she heard a voice she thought she'd never hear again. It was Alex, standing outside their old apartment building, looking slightly disheveled but with that same cocky smirk that once charmed her. He leaned casually against his car, twirling his keys on his finger, as if he hadn't disappeared without a word for 3 years. Emma's heart pounded in her chest, but this time it wasn't love or even heartbreak she felt. It was anger. He didn't offer any apology, any explanation. Instead, he had the audacity to laugh as if all of this was some elaborate joke. "You really stayed here all this time?" he sneered, glancing up at the shabby exterior of the apartment. "I thought you'd have moved on by now. Figured I'd come back and see how pathetic things were." He chuckled as though he found it all amusing. Emma's hands tightened around the grocery bags, her knuckles turning white. She felt a surge of anger like she had never felt before. She wanted to scream, to shout at him for the years he stole from her and Lily, but she held back. She took a deep breath and simply turned her back on him, walking into the building, leaving him standing there in the rain. But Alex didn't give up so easily. He called after her, laughing as he taunted her. What he didn't know was that his little stunt was about to backfire in a way he could never have anticipated. The following days, Alex kept showing up, lurking around the building like a bad memory that wouldn't fade. At first, Emma tried to ignore him, hoping he'd get bored and leave. But he seemed determined to stick around, almost like he was getting some twisted pleasure out of watching her struggle. He made snide comments about the worn-down car she drove, the hand-me-down clothes Lily wore, the fact that she still lived in the same dingy apartment. One evening, when Lily was already asleep, Emma finally confronted him. "Why are you here, Alex? You left. You made your choice. So why come back now? To gloat?" He shrugged casually, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Just curious, I guess. Wanted to see what you did with your life after I left. How you managed on your own. Honestly, Em, I didn't think you had it in you." He smirked again, that infuriating smirk that used to make her heart skip a beat, but now just made her want to punch a wall. Emma stood her ground, refusing to let him get under her skin. "Well, now you've seen. I managed. Lily's happy, she's healthy, and we don't need you. We never did." But Alex wasn't quite done. A few days later, he showed up again, this time with an even more mocking tone. "I'm sure you're dying to know where I've been," he began, weaving a tale of his adventures. He bragged about traveling to different cities, meeting new people, and living a carefree life. It was all a game to him, a chance to rub salt into old wounds. But the more he talked, the more Emma noticed the cracks in his story, the hesitation in his voice, the way his eyes darted away when he mentioned money. One rainy evening, while Alex was mid-tirade about his supposed success, Emma decided to call his bluff. "Sounds like you've had quite the life. Too bad I'm not buying a word of it." Alex's smug expression faltered for a split second before he recovered, but it was enough. Emma pressed on. "You're not here because you want to laugh at me. You're here because you've got nowhere else to go. Isn't that right, Alex?" Silence hung between them like a storm cloud. Alex opened his mouth to retort but closed it again, his smirk slipping away entirely. For the first time since he'd returned, he looked unsure of himself, almost vulnerable. Emma realized with a sudden, unexpected clarity that the power dynamics had shifted. She stepped closer, keeping her voice calm but firm. "Let me guess. You thought I'd be desperate enough to take you back. That you could waltz in, play the hero, and I'd be so grateful for your attention that I'd forget everything you did to us." Alex's shoulders slumped, and he finally stopped trying to hide behind that smug facade. He admitted that life hadn't turned out the way he'd imagined. He'd lost job after job, squandered money, and the friends he'd counted on had drifted away. He thought he could come back to Emma and find some comfort, even if it meant laughing at her struggles first, to keep his own pride intact. Emma watched him, her anger cooling into something like pity, but she knew one thing for sure. She was no longer that woman who stood in the doorway, begging him to stay. She had survived without him, and she had thrived in her own way. "I don't know what you're expecting, Alex," she said finally, "but you've got nothing to laugh at here, and you're not getting a second chance." She turned and walked back into the building, the door shutting firmly behind her, leaving Alex out in the rain, the one now facing the life he had chosen.